This is Medieval Manor project by Lane Harwood. In medieval times, the king would grant land to barons and lords, and they would become his vassals. Land was called a fief. That meant that they were bound by certain obligations to him, like serving in his army or providing him with knights. If there were a war, the nobles could count on the king for protection and justice. A higher-ranking noble could take another noble as his vassal. At the bottom of the social ladder were the peasants, made up of freeholders and serfs. The peasants did all the farming, and the lord of the manor would profit from what was produced on his land. The serfs were considered property of the manor and had very little rights. Now we're going to go to the manor. The, the manor was controlled by the lord and the lady. The land controlled by the lord and his household was called the domain. Their manor house was usually very large and made of stone. It would have a great hall for entertaining, a kitchen, and servant quarters. This is the dining room where they would have feasts of different animals and meats. And if you would go to your left, you can see the kitchen where the servants would prepare food and had their knives and pots. And if you go across to the other side of the manor house, there is a big empty room, and it's for dancing and if they had parties, they'll bring tables out and put them here. And now we'll go upstairs. This first room here is the lord and lady's room. So that's the lady's little place where she get ready for the day. And clock and their bed and their desks and all their things that they would need in their room. And that's their little library and their chessboard. They have a tapestry hanging on the wall there. And now if we go to the other rooms, this is the nanny's room. She has her little area to get ready for the day, and her bed, and her desk, and all the torches to light up her room. And now if you go to the other rooms in the house, you will see right here this tapestry in the middle of the room. And then in here is the servants' quarters where he had all of his things, and yeah, and his little desk with his drink and his bed. And now we'll go to the next room. This is the kids' room here. They have a little shelf with their animals on it and a little bit of toys. And we're now gonna go to the Wattle and Dodd houses. Wattle and Daub houses, where the peasants lived in the village. So these houses, they had a wood frame, and the rest of the walls were filled with sticks and then covered over with mud. They had thatched straw roof with an opening in the center for smoke from the fire. The hearth would be on the center of the room, and the animals would be kept inside at one end of the house. Each serf family would have a certain number of acre strips. They could farm for themselves, and they would also have their own gardens of vegetables near the house. The freeholders could lease land off the lord and to live and farm on his land. Next, we will go to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was very important during the medieval times. The church was very wealthy and owned 1/3 of the land in Europe. Parish priests were in charge of the churches on the manor lands and provided church services, confessions, performed marriages and burials, and taught school to boys. They also collected a tithe, which is 1/10 of the meat and crops from each family to support the church. All of this would be kept in a tithe barn. This is the tithe barn, where they kept the 1/10 of the meat and crops from each family. The land that the church sat on was worked from the benefit of the church alone, and it was called the glebe. The priest would also have his own house on the manor. This is the priest's house. Inside, he just has his basic necessities, a little kitchen, a desk area, and his bed. People believed that God and Satan's controlled everything from diseases to bad weather. The people would attend church once a week to learn about heaven, hell, and sin. They could be forgiven their sins by the priest or by going to pilgrimage to the shrine of a saint. Sorry. Next, we will go to the largest field out of the manor. They had 3 field systems. One field would be for summer planting, one for winter, and one would lie fallow. So the field that we're looking at right now is the fall field. There would be wheat, rye for bread. Oats would also be grown to feed livestock, and some of the rye would be used to make beer. Next, we will go to the spring field, which is the field that we're going to right now. The spring crops would be barley and beans. And next, if you can see, is the fallow field. A fallow field would be an empty field that had been farmed the year before, and it would be sitting fallow because it needs to collect the nutrients to grow plants again and vegetables and all the food that they would. And the same crop would be planted in a field every other year because different crops needed different nutrients. Peasants also raised cows, sheep, pigs, and goats and chickens. They also had oxen to pull heavy plows. I wanted to have a plow in my model, but I couldn't build one in Minecraft. However, I did build a tidal mill. It was used to grind the grain that was made into flour to bake bread, and it ran on water power. The tide would fill up the mill pond, and the gate would automatically close once the tide started to drop again. When the tide was low, the water that was dammed could be released into to turn the mill wheel. The wheel was attached to large stones that would turn and grind the grain. The villagers would have to pay to have their grain ground into flour. The charge was usually 1/16 of whatever amount of grain they brought in. The millers were serfs who inherited their jobs from their fathers. There is also usually an area to set up local marketplace once per week. Crusaders who were returning from Holy Land brought back new food and ideas that people had never been exposed to before. People wanted more of these items, and merchants started making journeys to gather them and bring them back to sell. This started the idea of marketplace. Peasant farmers could sell or barter their extra animals and food, and their merchants could sell their luxury items. Trade fairs also started that moved from town to town. Anyone could sell goods at the trade fair, but they all had to pay tax to the king and the local noble. There were also meadows where hay could be grown, and common pastures where farm animals could graze. The water source was important not only to run the mill, but also to provide fish to eat. There was usually a blacksmith. So what you can see now is the common pasture. Now behind the common pasture is just an empty space to plant hay, and there was usually a blacksmith for making weapons and tools. In a bakery, there was usually a blacksmith for making weapons and tools. This is the blacksmith. He makes weapons and tools and armor for the soldiers, and tools for the lords for the lord's needs. And he had horses that he made armor for too. And now we will go to the bakery. The bakery had an oven to bake bread because most peasant houses didn't have ovens. As you can see, we're coming up on the bakery now. So those two back buildings are two ovens where the baker can bake stuff. And then the main house is just an area where the baker keeps all the bread and stuff for the everyone in the manor who can and they can come and buy stuff. The king had judicial power over his land. His nobles, lords, and vassals, and anyone else living on his land, a steward was in charge of manoring court, and all villagers had to attend. Minor crimes were dealt with there. The villagers would choose a jury of 12 men, would gather evidence, and decide on a person was guilty or innocent, and put punishment. The king's court dealt with serious crimes, and person either faced a trial or by ordeal or a trial by battle. A trial by ordeal meant the person faced torture with water, poison, or red-hot iron, which was carried. If they died or the wounds got infected, they were guilty, and if they lived without infections, they were innocent. People believed that God was in charge in these trials. Trial by battle was only for nobility, and whoever won was innocent. If the loser survived the battle, he was hung. Even the king had to obey his feudal contract and respect his barons, because if he didn't, they could wage war on him. This is my Medieval Manor by Harwood.